What happens when two married therapists move into a house to help 7 seemingly perfect strangers admit their flaws? Will everyone continue living out their fake lives, or will they start getting real? This is Reality Rehab.
I asked Jessica to describe Laura, her mother-in-law, in one word.
She's carefree, gentle, adventurous, loving, sympathetic, kind, inspiring, humble, classy, and sassy.
She gave me 72. Literally, 72 adjectives. I asked for one.
Intelligent, warm. She's an incredible cook. She loves cats and dogs.
Okay, Jessica, I think we get the idea. I think we're good.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just love my mom.
Honey, do you have a mirror?
No, why?
I wish I was holding a mirror as you said all those beautiful words. I could not have asked for a more perfect daughter.
I love you, Mom.
I love you.
These people can't be real. I mean, I love my kids, but not that much.
How are you guys doing today? Are you feeling good? How's everybody doing? Great. Okay, good. Well, we called you here today to do a social exercise. This will help each of you become better at dealing with conflict.
Right. The exercise is called Talk to Me. I want each of you to take out your smartphones and text someone in the house who has made you angry. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Guys, you're not texting. Just text the first thing that comes to mind. Just remember, keep it honest. We're doing this because people are having a hard time communicating these days.
Ooh, I got one. Nikki, great. Who's it from and what does it say?
My bestie, Brooke.
Okay, and what did she say?
I want to be a better best friend.
Okay, and what else?
That's it.
Brooke, that's not how this exercise works.
I thought I was supposed to say something that made me angry about Nikki.
Right. But you texted Nikki saying that you wished you were a better best friend.
Right, I'm angry about that. I mean, I'm not really angry about it. Angry is such a strong word. I just wish I could be better. Wish is probably the better word.
Okay, we're missing the whole point.
You see, we're not communicating. The point was to text someone in the house who made you angry and to text them why they made you angry. I'm angry with you for making us do this silly exercise.
I mean, what? It's true. I am bad.
Oh, they don't get it. They just don't get it. What's wrong with these people? It was supposed to be a simple exercise, but no. They want to pretend that their lives are perfect. And you know what? They're not. Because deep down inside, they're angry. They're so angry. And it's a major problem.
Oh, it's a problem, all right. Honey, do you have a mirror?
No. Why?
Don't worry about it.
How we doing, church? Want to welcome back everybody joining us today at all of our different locations. Big shout out to Jupiter. Jupiter, it was great having you with us here at Gardens last weekend, but we are glad you're back into school this weekend and getting relaunched all over again. It's going to be great. Hey, we are in week 2 of our series called Reality Rehab, and this is all about getting your relationships right.
Yeah, because we all have some relationships that need rehabbing, right? Yeah. And if you're sitting here today and you think you don't have relationship problems, remember we said last week, you probably are the problem. Yeah. So we are here for you and we're praying for you, and this series is for you.
There's lots of people praying for you today, actually. And it's not too late if you haven't picked up our materials. We've made this for you. We recorded all the videos for it. It's all free for you to gather up a group of friends and go through this together. There's so much that we can't unpack on the weekend services, but we've unpacked it in this series.
So every week of this series, we're exposing the illusions that so many of us have when it comes to relationships. Last week, we defined an illusion as something that deceives. It gives a false impression of reality. And we want to shine some light on those illusions so that we can give you the tools to be able to have healthy relationships. And I know that I had a big illusion when we first got married. We had known each other since 7th and 8th grade. And when we got married, we had never actually had had a real fight. So I thought, since Todd and I love Jesus and we were trying to do, marriage God's way, that we would never actually get into a fight, that we didn't have to fight. This wasn't ever gonna happen for us until 3 days into our honeymoon, right? It happened when you spoke to me in that very demon voice of yours. and I was just devastated, because my illusion was that conflict is bad. And when conflict happened, I absolutely shut down.
And it's not good when your bride shuts down on your honeymoon. We went to a wedding this weekend, and it was a beautiful wedding we went to. The bride and groom are wonderful people. They're so in love. They were just, even during the vows, while I was giving the vows and they were quoting them back and forth to each other, there were tears coming down their eyes. And I'm sitting there thinking, it won't be long till there's going to be some other tears coming down your eyes, because they're so in love. Our love is a little bit of heaven on earth. And, our love is from heaven, made in heaven, Todd. And I'm like, we know there's other things made in heaven too.
Yeah.
Thunder and lightning is from heaven. Hailstorms and hurricanes, that's from heaven. And sometimes that looks a little bit more like what our relationships look
we've actually seen people come on our team here at the church. They've come on staff, and they tell us right when they come on, they're like, we're so happy to be on a church staff because we know that everyone here just loves each other so much, and you guys don't have problems here like we have in the world. And when you do come up against a problem, you just sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, right? We're like, wrong. This is not reality. So there's an illusion that we sometimes have when it comes to conflict. And sometimes we think that if we're in the right place in church or in a great relationship with the right people, a godly husband, doing all the right things, that we are not going to have conflict.
Yeah, but a dose of reality is this. When it comes to conflict, it happens. Conflict happens. If you're breathing, you're gonna have conflict. If you've been in a relationship for longer than 4 minutes, you're gonna have conflict. Yeah. So often we ask the question, how do I avoid conflict? But you can't. It will hunt you down.
Right.
So the better question is, how do we deal with conflict?
Yeah, so the key verse that we're looking at today are the words of Jesus found in Matthew chapter 5, and it says this: "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. It says you're going to be blessed when you make peace. Yeah. And this word peace in the Bible, the original definition means shalom. When you are a shalom maker, and shalom means this, that I wish you the highest good in your life, the highest good in your relationships. I wish the goodness of heaven over your life today.
When I'm in a conflict, that's not what I'm thinking. Mm-mm. I'm not thinking I want to wish them, I'm not wishing them good. I'm wishing they get a clue is what I'm wishing, right? I'm wishing that they'd understand how wrong they were. That's what I'm wishing. I'm not wishing the blessing on your household. I'm not thinking.
But peacemakers, the scripture says that peacemakers are going to be called children of God. And the reason they're going to be called children of God is because they are going to look like their Father. Being a peacemaker is what sets us apart. It's what makes us recognizable to the world as children of God. Ephesians 5 tells us that we are to be imitators of God. And what did God do whenever he experienced conflict? Because he did experience broken relationships, sure. Adam and Eve, all throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And even today, God experiences brokenness in relationships. And none of that brokenness is even his fault. But how does he engage in conflict? God is always the one that pursues reconciliation. He pursues restoration in the relationship. God is the one who paid the ultimate sacrifice in pursuing us by sending his son so that humanity could be reconciled back to him. God always moves in the direction of restoring relationships. Last week we talked about a couple of illusions. The first illusion was that great relationships just happen. Another illusion was that real love could be found with 25 girls living in the same mansion with one guy, as if real love's going to be found there. That was an illusion. But this illusion that conflict can be avoided if you just do all the right things, this illusion is one of the most common illusions that we have in the church and as Christians. And I think one of the reasons that we have this illusion as believers is because sometimes we have a misconception about what a real Christian looks like and what a good Christian looks like and how they act.
Yeah, we have the illusion that peacemakers are passive. We've got this picture of a lion laying down, cuddling up with a lamb, and isn't that,
blessed
isn't that
are the
cute?
peacemakers.
That's blessed are the peacemakers, right? And that's what that means to be a peacemaker. You just got to just be peaceful and lay down and let people trample all over you. But that's not true.
Right.
We were traveling overseas, and we ended up in Italy and went to Rome, and we showed up in Rome, and there was this picture of these soldiers in the streets of Rome. And we asked our guide, has there been a terrorist event? He said, no, they're just keeping the peace.
Right, right.
And you look at that and you go, they're just keeping the peace? Yeah, the same soldiers that are trained for battle are trained and equipped to keep the peace. And so the illusion is that peacekeepers or peacemakers are passive, but the truth is they are skilled fighters. They've got to fight for the peace. In fact, the Bible is full of fighting words when it comes to peace.
Right.
In Ephesians 4:3, it says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bonds of peace. And that word, make every effort, is a word of striving and fighting through the pain.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fight for the unity. I'm gonna fight for the relationship. I'm gonna fight for you. In Hebrews chapter 10, around verse 23, 24, it talks about conflict in relationship. And the word conflict in the Greek is athlesis, which is where we get the word athlete from. But the definition of that word means to struggle. It's a struggle requiring combat training.
Yeah.
So conflict is a struggle that requires combat training. You gotta be prepared. You gotta get ready to fight. You gotta be like a UFC champ fighter in the ring, ready to go, ready to knock somebody out to defend the peace.
Yeah.
And the reason that this is so important that we get this today is because you have probably never been trained in conflict resolution. Most of us, our parents didn't train us how to resolve conflict. Our friends didn't teach us how to resolve conflict. We didn't take a class in conflict management in our university. And so we go through life lacking the skill set that we need, that is one of the most important skill sets we have, because we're gonna have conflict in relationships.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter how successful you might be, how wealthy you might be, how talented you might be. If your relationships are messed up, you are gonna be messed up.
Yeah, and I think another reason this is so important is because unresolved conflict always leads to isolation. It always leads to loneliness. And unresolved conflict will cause your relationships to fall apart, and it also will keep you from taking risks on future relationships. So this is such an important issue. And I remember, Todd, when you and I were first married, I really thought that I had this whole peacemaking thing down pat. I thought that I was an amazing peacemaker, because every time we had an argument or a disagreement, actually there wasn't an argument to be had. I would just kind of shut down or stuff it down. I thought because I could avoid conflict that I was actually a peacemaker.
And I just thought that I was a really good debater. That's what I thought.
And you were. You were a great debater.
So,
but when it comes to conflict, most people fall into two categories. You're either a fighter, or a fleer. Right, and it could depend on what your perception of conflict and what your past experience have been. Sometimes people fight their way to conflict, and sometimes they flee away from conflict. And I was a fleer. And what I found out really early on was that I was not a peacemaker, but I was actually a peace faker. Because I wasn't giving our relationship the opportunity to grow. I wasn't giving us our relationship the opportunity to have more intimacy that comes when you learn how to navigate conflict together. So write this down. Peacemakers are not peace fakers.
That's right.
Peacemakers are not peace fakers. And if we want to stop faking peace and start making peace, there's a couple of things that we need to do. A couple of real things that we need to do. And the first one is this, is we need to get real with ourselves. Yeah. If we're gonna stop faking and start making peace, we have to get real with ourselves. Remember last week we talked about that every relationship that you are in has one common denominator, and that's you. Everywhere you go, there you are. So it's important that we get real about ourselves.
Yeah, and I think we tend to see things the way we see things, right? I tend to see things from my perspective, not from your perspective, because that's your perspective. That's not my perspective. My perspective is my perspective. I see one side of the story, mine. That's what I see. That's all I get, right?
Yeah.
There's a lady that was in the airport, and she was waiting on her flight, and she stopped by the little shop to pick up something to eat. She grabbed a Kit Kat bar and a Diet Coke because the calories would offset, you know how some of you do. And so she looked to find a place to sit down. It was kind of crowded. There was one seat at the end of the line, kind of far away from the gate, but she made her way there with all of her carry-on luggage. She sat it down. There was a little table between her and the big man that was in the chair next to her. She put her stuff around, got it all organized, and she was so excited to have a few minutes of peace and quiet to eat her Kit Kat bar before she had to board her plane. And all of a sudden she looked over to grab her Kit Kat bar, and the man grabbed her candy bar, opened it up, broke off a piece of that Kit Kat bar, and began to eat her Kit Kat bar. She could not believe that he was eating her Kit Kat bar. She just kind of glared at him. She reached over with a little attitude, snapped off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. She began to eat it and just chomping it right in his face. And he's just like looking at her like, what's the problem, lady? He grabs another piece of her Kit Kat bar. Well, as soon as he picked the third piece, you know there's only 4 little pieces. So she reached down to grab that one and stuffed that one in her mouth. Well, the man got up and walked away. He actually went over, bought another Kit Kat bar, brought it, opened it up, took a piece of it, and she thought, well, if he ate my Kit Kat bar, I'm gonna eat his Kit Kat bar. So she reaches down and grabs 2 pieces of the Kit Kat bar, begins to eat it quickly. The man eats the last piece. She hears the call for her airplane that it's time to board, and she starts to get her things together. She doesn't know whether to confront the man. I mean, it is just a Kit Kat bar, but she's very upset. So she reaches down in her purse to get her boarding pass, and there's her Kit Kat bar. She had just eaten 2 halves of his Kit Kat bar with an attitude, because we just see things the way we see things.
Yeah, and getting real with yourself means that you realize that you're not always right. Yeah. And this is a tough one, isn't it? Yeah. Not for you, but for others. This is a tough one. I'm just talking about all of us here. This is a tough one, because even if you're right most of the time, there's times that you can be so right, you're wrong. Yeah. You can have the right answer with the wrong attitude. And that doesn't do anything to resolve conflict. You know, I think one of the most important things to know when you're getting real with yourself is that that even if you are 98% right and only 2% wrong, you need to take 100% responsibility for your 2%. That's right. Take 100% responsibility for your 2%.
And you're usually a little more than 2% wrong. I'm just saying. Just throw it out there. You know?
It's a good place to start, though. So taking 100% responsibility of your 2% means that the first thing that you do is that you talk to God about your 2%. Right. Before you talk to anybody else about it, you go to God first and ask Him to shine the light on your heart so that you can know how to handle your 2%. And you know what usually happens when you ask Him? He usually tells you, look at this verse in Psalm 139. It says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my ways, and see if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in your way." And you know, when we ask God to show us, when we ask Him to show us what's in our hearts, to search our hearts, He'll do it. He tells us. And you know, I remember He's done that to me several times. And He's told me before, you know, "Julie, you know, that might have been the truth, what you said, but the tone that you said it might have been the truth, but it certainly wasn't filled with my grace. And that tone made somebody else feel small." You know, he's told me before that, hey, you may be a great debater, but that doesn't mean that you're always right. And it's so important that we know that we ask God to search our hearts first and see if there's any way, and He'll show us.
Yeah, He will. Mm-hmm. Not search their hearts. That's usually what I pray. Lord, search their hearts. Show them the way. No, that's not what the Scripture says.
But usually when we ask Him to search our hearts, that
search
2%.
Her hearts, Lord, have her search her heart.
That 2% usually goes up to about 4%, and in most cases it goes up to about 40%.
It's a lot higher for me. Yeah. The second thing there in this whole part of getting real with yourself is getting ready. If you understand there's going to be conflict and you know it's going to happen in your relationship, then go ahead, get a plan. Get people in your life that can speak into your life. Yeah. I've got people in my life that speak into my life. So when I am not myself, when I am not, when I'm in a conflict issue, I can go to them, and they're not going to just tell me what I want to hear. They're going to actually tell me what I need to hear. Yeah. And if you don't have those people in your life now, get them in your life so that when conflict comes into your life, you're ready.
Yeah, I know we have a guy on our team, and he's an amazing leader, an amazing pastor. He's a get-it-done kind of guy, and we noticed that he did get the job done, but there were a few hurt feelings in the wake of his path, and I remember, he was challenged on that, and so he went to his team, and he asked the hard question, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And he really opened himself up and prepared himself for conflicts that he wasn't in any conflict at the time, but he was preparing himself for things that might be down the road. And I watched how his leadership, just expanded, because not only did he get the job done, but he brought people along with him, and the relationships and the leadership had exponential impact, all because he opened himself up to say, what's it like to be on the other side of me?
Yeah, Proverbs 27:6 says, you can trust what your friend says even when it hurts. You can trust what a friend says. Even though it hurts, even though it may not be what you want to hear, you can trust the words of the inside because the friend's got your best at heart.
Yeah. I think that's so good. One of the things that happens whenever there's conflict is there's a gap that happens. And I remember a few years ago, Todd, you and I were in London, and we saw these signs all over the London tube stations, their train stations, and it said, mind the gap. And when we get on the train, they would say, mind the gap, mind the gap. What does mind the gap mean? We didn't know what it meant, but we knew that it must be pretty important. So we asked someone, and they told us that there's a big gap in between the platform that you're standing on and the train that you're getting on. And so it's really important that you watch and you pay attention to that gap so that you don't trip up or drop your small child down that gap. If you don't pay attention to the gap, somebody might get hurt. And it's the same thing that happens in relationships, because whenever there's conflict in a relationship, a gap starts to form. And so it's so important that we pay attention to that gap, or else somebody might get hurt. I've asked a couple people to come up here and help me demonstrate this. This is all about the conflict gap. So we've got Mike and Stephanie and Bob and Amy. Come on up here. So Mike and Stephanie, you guys can stand right here. Bob and Amy, why don't you come on up here?
Into the light.
Into the light, yes. So Amy, you can stand right here. Bob, you can stand right here. So Bob and Amy, they're amazing. They're just these are the right people right here, doing the right thing. They love Jesus. Their marriage is strong. They're shoulder to shoulder, loving God, serving people. And then it happens. Yeah. And it could be a difference it happens, yeah. It can be a difference, of how they handle the finances or how they discipline their kids, or it could be a difference in their political preferences, or it might be just a misunderstanding. But what happens when that conflict arises, there's a little gap that forms here, right? A little separation. This separation, there's no sin in this separation or in this gap. This is neutral territory. It's like an opportunity. It's an opportunity for good things to happen or an opportunity for bad things to happen. But Bob says a few things to Amy that really starts to hurt her feelings. And Amy is not really happy about this, so she turns the cold shoulder and she shuts down. And then the gap gets a little bit wider. Time goes by. Amy's been praying. She's been praying to God. Nothing's changing. He's still saying mean things. She's still shutting down, withholding and her love from him because she's done. And so time goes by, the gap grows wider, and Amy can't stand anymore, so she decides that she has got to talk to Stephanie and tell Stephanie what is going on. Can you believe he said that? And then Bob is like, what the heck? So he's going to talk to Mike about this. Can you believe that she voted for so-and-so? And can you believe that he said this to me? And what happens? As time goes on, the gap grows wider. And see, there was no sin. Yeah, there was no sin in the original conflict. The sin was all that happened in the gap. Right. The angry words, the shutting down, the gossip that happened, the judging that happened. The sin wasn't in the conflict, but the sin is what we put in the gap. So it's so important that when conflict happens that we close the gap quickly and we pay attention to what we do and who we bring into that gap. Thank you guys. Good job.
So good. So one of the ways that you can mind the gap is the second point today, and that's this. You got to go to the right person. You have to go to the right, if you're not gonna be a peace faker, but you're gonna actually be a peacemaker, you gotta go to the right person. Write this down. Peacemakers make the first move. Peacemakers make the first move. So many times when there's conflict in a relationship, whether it's at work or it's with your family members or friends, we go to everyone except the right one, right? We go to everybody else and we just go, I just got to tell you what happened. You wouldn't believe what they said to me. You wouldn't believe what my boss did. You wouldn't believe what my parents are just so, they don't understand. They took my phone, my iPhone 8 away. I just got it. And so they don't, and we go to everybody else and we create this gap. Or we don't go to anybody, and what we do is we stuff it and we internalize it. But peacemakers don't do that. You're a peacemaker. Peacemakers go to the right person. Peacemakers make the first move. Jesus was talking about this in Matthew chapter 5 when he was talking about when you come to worship. And he says this in verse 23. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar, go first and be reconciled with them, then come and offer your gift. Now, I want you to get a picture of this, because they weren't just bringing their little, they didn't have push pay back then. They didn't have a check they were dropping. They were bringing a live animal. Right. And what Jesus is saying is, don't even bother bringing your sacrifice. Just leave it there. It doesn't matter if it runs off. Because it doesn't matter what you're holding on to. If you're holding on to a grudge, you're holding on to this bitterness and this problem, go get that right first. The peace between you and the people in your life is so important to God that he says, don't waste your time worshiping. Just go to that person and make it right. Don't wait for them to come to you. You go to them. You be the initiator. Right. You take the step. I really believe in my spirit that some of you this week, you need to have a peace talk with somebody. You need to set up a peace talk. You need to say, hey, this has been going on too long, or I just wonder if there's something going on that we need to resolve here. We need to sit down and talk this out so that we can be right with each other and right with God. Yeah, that's so good, because when we don't go to the right person, we miss the opportunity to release them from the negative feelings that they may have, and to maybe even to clear up a misunderstanding. I remember a couple years back, I was in the Life Center here at the Gardens campus, and I ran into one of my friends. We had served in ministry together early on when we were young moms, and I hadn't seen her for quite some time. We weren't serving in the same area, and I said, hey, how you doing? I was so excited to see her, and she was like cold, stone cold. I was like, oh. I said, everything going okay? Yep, that's fine. And I walked away and I thought, wow, I can't even imagine that I've even had time to offend her. I'm not sure, what's going on here, but I was kind of taken aback, but I kind of blew it off because I thought maybe she just had a bad day. And I just wanted to overlook it. Well, then I ran into her again the next week, and the same thing happened. And I just walked away and I started thinking, well, there is just no way that I could have offended her. And I wonder what her problem is. And I started going through all these things in my head. But for once, I got it right. And I thought, I am not going to flee. Right? I'm not going to flee away from this conflict, but I'm going to step into this to find out, what's going on here. And so, I reached out to her and I just said, hey, can we talk? Because I'm not sure if there's something between us, but I just want to make sure that all hearts are clear. We got together and it was a 2-hour conversation, and there had been some misunderstandings, and there had been some things that we needed to clear the air on. And now her family, her children are flourishing in ministry. They're serving, they're loving being a part of all that God's doing. And I look back at that conversation, I think, gosh, I wonder what would have happened if I just kind of let things go. And that was one time I got it right. But I have to say that my biggest regrets in relationships are not words that I've said, but they're conversations I didn't have. And so I look at that time and I think, I want to get it right, because I've probably gotten it wrong as many times as I've gotten it right. But from that day on, I thought, I just want to get it right, because I want people, I want to be able to release them from their negative feelings and love them enough to be able to step into all that God has for them. And this is a part of it. It's so important that you go to the right person. And our tendency still, is our human nature, is not to go to the right person, to go to the wrong person. And you may say, well, who is the wrong person? Anybody who's not that right person. Yeah. There's one person there that's part of the problem and a part of the solution. If it's not them, it's a wrong person. And we justify it sometimes by saying, well, I need prayer covering. I just need to share my burden with you so you can pray for me about this problem. Or I'm just a verbal processor. I just need to process this, which is really code. I just have to talk about it with you, And we talk about it, and we actually go from we're not peacemaking, we're no longer peace faking, we're now peace breaking. Because we're actually breaking up the relationship and breaking up the oneness and the unity that God wants to have within our lives. Yeah, Proverbs 16:28 says, a troublemaker plants seeds of strife, but gossip separates the best of friends. And it's really hard for us to think of ourselves
as gossipers, right? You know, we don't like to call ourselves or label ourselves in that way. But if you really think about what gossip is and how we would define gossip and how we define it with our team around here, is that if you are not a part of the problem or a part of the solution and you're talking about it, that's gossip, right? So that's a pretty narrow definition, and gossip separates best friends and causes disunity. And we're called to be defenders of the unity. So it's so important that we get this right. But you know, sometimes in a relationship, the gap grows so wide and so much time has passed that it's really difficult to find your way back. And sometimes you need a little bit of help. And so we want you to watch this.
You guys grew up together.
Since 3rd grade. What are you looking at?
I'm not looking at it.
We're not good enough for you. You look for something else?
No, I don't know.
What are you, big supermodels? Oh, who's us? Supermodels. What do you model, gloves? What are you doing? The girl's totally into me.
Brad, eat a Snickers.
Why?
Because you get a little angry when you're hungry. Better?
Better. So, ladies.
So, losers.
Stacy, relax.
Sorry. You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers really satisfies.
Sometimes people just aren't themselves, right? They're having a bad day. And one thing we realized around here, I realized, was that I am not the only one who had a difficult time having awkward conversations when somebody did something that caused a gap in our relationship. And so these are a couple tools that we use around here on our team. And one of them is that we know, since people are not always themselves, we have Snicker bar conversations, right? And sometimes if someone comes into your office and they have a Snicker bar in your hand, you know that you're getting ready to have a conversation.
They're not just coming with a treat. They're coming for a talk.
They're not just coming with a treat, right? Yeah. They're coming in to say, hey, you know, I know that you would never say anything to hurt my feelings, but, you know, or it might be a little bit bigger, like, hey, your team left our team with a big mess last week. Can we work it out?
Sometimes the Snicker bars are this big.
Yeah,
they're real big.
Yeah,
whole
I know.
package.
Someone came in with a bulk, size box one day. So you know you're in trouble. Not in trouble, but these are just ways to be able to start the conversation. But sometimes they go a little bit deeper, and there's some things that might have been building up over time. And the conversation goes beyond a Snickers bar. And we have these kind of floating around the church here too. And this is the elephant in the room. This is the elephant in the room, and sometimes someone might walk into your office with one of these. And it's usually, I have one of these in my office, and I've had to use this from time to time because I've told you I am not good at this, right? And so I needed help to have these awkward to amazing conversations. And so how I usually start this conversation is this. I just want you to know that I am not very good at this. I'm not great when it comes to engaging in conflict or these difficult conversations, but I want you to know I love you so much and I value our relationship that even though I'm not going to do this 100% right, I want you to hear my heart in this. And that's how the conversation usually starts. And one of the things that we always try to remember when we have these kinds of conversation is to always affirm the person, affirm the relationship, and attack the problem. Yeah. Don't attack the person, and affirm the person and attack the problem.
And you did that so well one time when you had to bring a Snickers bar into our conversation. And you said, you waited, you said something like, honey, I know you love me. You're like my biggest cheerleader and you're always there for me. But when you do this, when you interrupt me when I'm talking and talk over me and we're in a group of friends and you're just kind of pouncing on the conversation, this is the way it makes me feel. And I remember you handled it so well because you were making me feel really good. You're just my best friend and you're just like my favorite and you love me. But when you do this, it made me aware that you weren't attacking me, you were attacking what I was doing. And there was a lot of truth in it. And
I knew it wasn't your heart.
Right. And the way you presented it to me allowed us to address the issue because I had done it multiple times and I didn't realize I was doing it.
That's good. Yeah.
So we got to get real about ourselves. Let's wrap this up. Go to the right person. And the third thing we got to do if we are going to be a peacemaker and not a peace faker is we got to realize that real restoration requires real humility. If you want real restoration in your relationship, it's going to require real humility. And this is not just about resolving the issues, making sure you prove the point. It's about reconciling or restoring the relationship. And if you refer back to that passage of scripture that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 5, where he said, if you're offering your gift and they remember that your brother has something against you, it says, go be reconciled with them. The emphasis was on reconciliation, not on resolution. And reconciliation is always about the relationship. Resolution is about trying to fix the problem. That's not the focus. The focus is, how do I fix the relationship? How do I restore the relationship? And when we understand there's always going to be differences. We're raised differently. We have different values, different perspectives, different, some people have different political viewpoints, all these different things. If we understand there's going to be legitimate differences, but those differences don't have to divide us, it helps us to step into restoring the relationship.
Yeah, we can learn to disagree agreeably. Right. We're not always going to see eye to eye to be able to walk arm in arm. There's that true unity isn't uniformity. We're not all going to be the same. And part of reconciliation is recognizing that we're not going to resolve every single issue, but we can be reconciled and have a right relationship. But I think it's so important, as we said, is to not focus on always being right, but to focus on the other person and love them enough to listen to their perspective. James 1:19-20 says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. When we're quick to listen and slow to speak, we gain understanding from the other person.
Yeah, God's given us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we can be quick to listen and slow to speak.
But actually, some people may not know, I am actually deaf in my left ear. So I only have 1 ear. So I actually think that I have like a special dispensation
I don't think so.
to talk more. Yeah. But the truth is that communication is key. And the key to communication is listening. Yeah. See, listening, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to listen to somebody else's perspective and not be so consumed with getting your own point across.
Yeah, and I think also a key to communication is to communicate quickly. When you've got that strife going on in a relationship, there's a verse in Ephesians that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Yeah. And I know that sometimes for us, Julie, we can't always resolve the issue before we go to bed, or we just stay up all night talking about it, which she tries to do sometimes. And instead, what we can do is we say, hey, we're committed to each other. Yeah. We've identified we've acknowledged the problem, and we've affirmed the relationship. Yeah. And then we go, we're going to solve that tomorrow, this coming week.
Yeah, it takes real humility to stop standing your ground and start taking ground in the relationship. Right. To stop fighting with the other person and start fighting for the relationship. See, the truth is that every great relationship that I know of is made up of 2 really great forgivers. Yeah. Every great relationship that I know is made up of 2 really great forgivers. See, forgiveness is this 2-way street, right? On one way, there's offering forgiveness, and on the other side of the street, there's apologizing. It's a 2-way street, apologizing and extending forgiveness. And we have to get really good at apologizing and extending forgiveness if we're going to have great relationships.
And sometimes the hardest words to say are, I'm sorry. Yeah. I was wrong, right?
You can do it.
Because sometimes our apologies stink, don't they? They're like, I'm sorry that you were so offended so easily, right? I'm sorry that you misunderstood. I'm sorry, but if you hadn't done this first, then I wouldn't have had. We've all done those kind of stinking apologies before.
Yeah, we've got to get great at apologizing and extending forgiveness. And this week in our groups in Reality Rehab, we're going to be talking a lot about forgiveness. And next week, we're going to be answering the question, is there a difference between saying I'm sorry and asking for forgiveness?
Yeah, so there's great things to unpack, but let's wrap it up with this. Jesus said in our passage today, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And I want you to know something today. You are the children of God, which means you are peacemakers. You are created in his image. And this week, we're challenging you to go out and make the first move, because peacemakers make the first move. Not peace faking, but truly peacemaking.
Yeah, so since we make the first move, I want you to think about a relationship that you might be in right now that you need to make the first move. Maybe you think you're 98% right and only 2% wrong, but owning that 100% of your 2%. What person do you need to apologize to? What person do you need to release from some negative feelings that they may be having?
And some of you need to start with you. Because remember, the only person you can really change is you. You can't change them. You can allow the Holy Spirit to change you. And so asking the Lord, what is there in me that's feeding into the conflict and the turmoil that I'm having in my relationships? What do you need to change in me?
Yeah, and if you're in conflict today, don't be discouraged, because there's no sin in the conflict. Conflict isn't the absence of unity. It's actually the opportunity for unity. It's the opportunity for you to love people like God loves them and reflect his heart and be recognized as a child of his.
So as we close today, we're going to give you a couple times, a little a couple things to pray about. First, what's that relationship that needs you to make that first move this week? What do you need to do? How do you need to do it? You can take a Snickers bar with you and just have a conversation with them and get it started that way. Lord, what is it in me that needs to change? But we're also gonna pray for some of you today because you're never gonna have peace in your relationships until you have peace with God. And some of you don't have peace in that relationship. And that relationship with Jesus is the relationship that changes all the other relationships. When you get that relationship right, it makes all the other relationships begin to find the right rhythm and the right place and space. But if that relationship's messed up, all your relationships are gonna be messed up. So we wanna give you an opportunity to make sure that relationship is right. So without anybody leaving right now, we just wanna pray for you. Would you stand on all of our campus locations? Campus teams, you can come and get ready to close in prayer. We love you so much, and we are praying that this season that we're in is gonna redefine your life and your relationships. In Jesus' name, let's pray together.